I would like to welcome you to today's session, Organizing Data to Enable End-to-End Measurement. Our guests today are Chris Comstock and Nate Woodman. A little about our guests. Chris is the Chief Product Officer here at Clarivine. He has over 15 years of experience in digital marketing and data management fields, and he's worked as a consultant, product, and brand leader for a variety of top companies. Nate Woodman is an ad tech industry leader and measurement expert. He is the founder of Proof, a consultancy that helps clients plan and deploy measurement and optimization solutions that address the anonymous web. Throughout his career, Nate has worked across ad tech startups, consulting, and advertising companies. Today, they'll be going through a Q&A style discussion, defining what end-to-end measurement is and the biggest challenges facing brands and agencies today. And with that, I will pass it over to Chris and Nate.
All right. I know, Nate, we had a great conversation in our last session really around why the changes and what's happening. And so in this session, I know we're going to talk about organizing data for more end-to-end measurement, really kind of the larger topic for the entire session. We've been talking about that. I know you and I have, and we, trying to frame it with some of our customers directly. But like, what is end-to-end measurement? Like, what does that actually mean? And can you kind of explain from your perspective what that is?
Yeah, so I think the last time we were talking, we talked about there's a loss of precision that you have when you kind of lose some of the observed and log level data, where you can gain, kind of with more breadth. And I think I think it's the best way to describe, kind of end-to-end measurement is that you have more breadth, and it's more holistic than what you're used to getting, which is channel level kind of precision, right? So I describe end to end as really about starting from the beginning, right? And then in the process, when you're starting from the beginning, you're also integrating multiple channels, right? And then bringing that measurement all the way through to the end. So I'll describe with an example, right? Or kind of like to give some more details. But it kind of in marketing and effectiveness, kind of we talk a lot about there's paid media, which we've kind of already discussed, your Facebook and your search and kind of etc. and what you might do in programmatic. There's owned media, which is kind of what you do in email, right? And what you do on site, right? There's also content, which is even before, kind of like a lot of the paid and the, a lot of the paid and the owned. So when you kind of start at the beginning, you start thinking about, well, how do I align, kind of each of those, channels that go kind of across, kind of the owned and the paid media. But even how do I go all the way down to the roots and bring in things like content, right? So the first step is how do you organize the information, all the information at the beginning, which we talked about last time, which is about you have to have the processes in order to make sure that you set up your inputs correctly, right, across all those different channels. Right? But in addition to that, you do have the opportunity to do things now like take a creative asset, right? Take that piece of creative, and the term I use is to parameterize it, right? Now I'll describe that. So you have a creative asset, say if it's a television commercial, right? There are multiple ways to parameterize it in order to score that, right? But if you score it effectively, right, you can maybe it's about like, did this piece of creative adhere to best practices, right? Is this piece of creative kind of like, what is the emotional resonance in this piece of creative, right? And you start understanding and turn the creative asset into text, you turn it into metadata, right? You can take that metadata and then manage it throughout the entire system. So by the time you look at your output, you can start pivoting, call your analytics and pivoting your optimization by those parameters that you pre-established, kind of at the beginning, right? So when I describe end to end, it's like, all right, how do I create cohesion and kind of like a holistic, really metadata or taxonomy across those divisions and those silos, but even encapsulate things like that you haven't really ever done before, into your metadata. Like, what are the values of this creative? Because when you do that, you can start doing things like you can start using that creative parameterization, your media mix models. You can start using it in your optimization output, and then you kind of get a much more holistic system. And that's how I would describe, kind of end to end.
Yeah, it's funny when you talk about that. I feel like end-to-end measurement or using creative dimensions.
Yeah.
It feels like what DCO has been around, dynamic creative. There's creative in every experience.
Right.
How is, and I think if you think about that from an ad tech perspective or maybe just technology perspective, like when you talk about it, what, I mean, and you touched a little bit on, but what is different than what we've been doing, or what is that proposed end-to-end measurement really different than what has existed for, again, like I mentioned, dynamic creative, where there has been creative and there is creative optimization happening. Are they just not using those dimensions? Have those dimensions lived somewhere else that haven't been able to be used in some of those optimization engines?
I think some of those dimensions are used in DCO, right? But
Okay.
DCO is only one channel. And I think that's the difference. So it's like DCO can still do its thing. It can kind of bring in the right, the right background color or the right image that, kind of adheres to the measurement that you're using within that channel, right? Because the DCO still needs to respond to some metric, whether it be a click or a kind of a conversion as it's measured in that channel. So DCO is a solution that still exists within a channel or a silo, right?
Yep.
When we start thinking about an end to end, right? It's like, well, how do I do consistent parameterization, right, across all the content that I produce as a company, kind of in different groups, different divisions, different countries, right, in a very consistent way. When a piece of content goes into a 30-second ad creative, or a piece of content goes into a web page, or a piece of content goes into a digital campaign, that it's actually all scored and parameterized in the same way, so that you
Yep.
can then pull the insight through in that kind of holistic end-to-end manner. So I think one of the things here too is maybe we use talk about end-to-end, which is kind of a left to right, but I think there's also kind of part of opportunity here to have end-to-end to be synonymous with holistic, right? Which is, I think, more top to down. But I think those terms go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think one thing I hear from our customers a lot is you've got your content team and you've got maybe one or two or many different dams or different
Yeah.
dams, different
Yeah.
teams. Is that there are teams that are tagging content, and when we talk about the measurement, it's the come back to what we talked about last time, the data science team.
Yeah.
How do they have those relationships throughout the process, the end-to-end process. So when it gets to do that measurement, they're not left cleaning it up and they have all the right information, to your point, across all those teams and channels, right? And it's not sitting in a spreadsheet or in, someone's dam where someone's doing a lot of hard work to classify those
Yeah.
dimensions. How do we
Yeah.
bring that through that process? So kind of leads to I guess the next question, right? What is the biggest challenge, right, on what we just talked about for brands and agencies? And I think maybe the key there, or one of the keys that I've heard around brands and agencies where there is collaboration for the work that happens to execute and deliver this,
Yeah.
to get to creative measurement and to connect all those pieces together.
Yeah. So that's for creative specifically, I think people sometimes talk again about the silos and the channels, right? Is that you have a creative development team, right? You have a paid media team, you have an own media team, right? But there's always gaps in between them. There's white space in between them, right? Because they don't necessarily speak to each other and they don't talk to each other, and so they all go about doing their work, but they're in order to kind of get it so that there is consistent, kind of labeling, kind of a taxonomy across the different groups. You need to have, a solution that focuses on taxonomy management. So when it comes down to, kind of creative measurement specifically, I think the first thing that you need to be able to think of is like, well, how do I take these creative assets that I have and how are they labeled correctly, so that by the time they're executed in the paid media channel or the owned media channel, that the information, the metadata flows through all the way to the end. I think that's the first order problem of how do you kind of connect you have all this content in your dam, right? You might have organized it to a degree, but you still really don't have any idea of where it's ever used.
Yep.
So tackling, that, kind of in order to tackle where it's used, you need to have this process of taxonomy management and control, right, of the creative inputs into where they're executed. So by the time the data science gets it on, the readout, that it's been carried all the way through end to end.
Yep.
So I think that's the first place to start is how do you carry the creative metadata through the entire activation process, right? So you know which piece of content have been used where.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something I've heard probably more recently. Some of our customers even saying our creative teams, our design teams spend a
Yeah.
lot of time building creative, and it's great creative, but many times they don't know if it's ever used, and if it is used, how's it performing, right? And I think that where we see some of our customers starting to focus their energy is if we can get that feedback loop, or if they can get that feedback loop and help them get that performance back, they can incorporate that performance into design and make more impactful and focus, right? Instead of designing a bunch of assets that in some cases may or may not get used. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I mean it kind of leads into the next topic. I don't want to get too far too fast, but taking that next step, our third session, really going to dive into aggregate data management and optimization. So how do we take everything that we've just talked about, and how do we actually make the change to use that information more quickly to optimize for the different teams. So we'll talk about that in the next session.
All right. Fantastic. Thanks for your time.